So I have created here what I think is a pretty comprehensive view of kind of the similarities and differences between the Trump supporters and our dear friends, the Regressives. And I kind of decided to do this because I was looking for something online that was kind of gave a breakdown of this, but I really couldn't find anything good. And I don't know how many of you out there have heard of the horseshoe theory in political science. Basically, it's just the idea that as you get farther apart on the political spectrum, uh, some of the same kinds of behaviors and tendencies tend to come up, and so that actually results in a scenario where the two groups that you would think are the farthest apart on the political spectrum are actually quite close in many respects. Um, and I do think that that phenomenon is popping up in our modern political environment with the Trump supporters and the kind of far left progressive quote unquote Democrats. And that's the thing, is they're barely even Democrats. I don't even know really what they are. A lot of them voted for the Green Party. I would say the Regressives in this kind of iteration that I have here, this describes kind of the most diehard Bernie Sanders people and probably most of Green Party voters. Really don't think that many kind of third way Clintonite or Obama Democrats fit most of these. So anyway, I won't go through these two pillars. I think most of this is fairly obvious. Might be a little controversial, but I think this is really the important part. So let's just go through this. And if anyone really disagrees with these, I would love to hear how and why. But anyway, all right. So both the Trump supporters and the aggressives hate their party's establishment. That's been true for basically the entirety of the 2016 campaign. I mean, the Bernie Sanders people were railing against Hillary. I mean, they really didn't like her. And keep in mind, Bernie Sanders is an independent. He was never actually a Democrat. So they're basically using him as an insurgent to try to kind of take over the party because they just hated the party establishment. And the same thing with the Trump supporters. You know, you go on Breitbart on any given day during the election, and they were ripping on Republicans almost as much as they were ripping on Democrats, which is just kind of weird, you know? So anyway, yeah, that's one thing that brings them together, is they just hate their party's establishment. And that's true to this day. Most of the Trump supporters are not in like the Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell camp. They're kind of a bizarre shoot off of the Tea Party movement is what I would characterize them as. But anyway, okay, so next one is promote the use of state power to punish, silence political opponents. So I think you see this. I thought of this when I was thinking of the regressives, actually, because I was thinking of the college students, and I just went to the Black Liberation Collective website, and yeah, if you want to enter the Twilight Zone, I recommend going to that website and seeing the views that these people have. They really do think they're trying to leverage the power of the state to basically silence. This comes up in the concept of hate speech on the left, right? So anything that is like against ethnic minorities or sexual minorities, LGBT people. The list could probably go on for I don't even know how long the list is now, but so the use of hate speech laws among the regressives, and also their attempts, like I don't know if you saw what happened at Berkeley about a week ago, but like literally shutting down the Milo Yiannopoulos event because they were just like, no, we don't care, like he is we don't care what he has to say, like we know that he's a hateful fuck basically, so we're not going to let him talk. So that is kind of where that comes up on the left. On the right, you definitely see that. You saw that at the rallies, at the Trump rallies, where they were talking about, you have these literally chants of probably thousands of people saying, lock her up, referring to Hillary Clinton. So using the power of the state to punish your political opponents. Oh, and also this comes up on the left too when you see I mean, there's a story of that baker. I don't remember where they were, but they wouldn't like bake a wedding cake for an LGBT couple, and so the regressives rallied around rallied around the regressive flag and used the power, like leverage the power of the state, basically pressure the state into making those people pay a fine for discriminating against the LGBT couple. So that definitely comes up on both the left and the right, and that is not something that you see in kind of a classical liberal or libertarian sphere. You just don't see that. So the next thing is they oppose free trade deals. This was interesting because the regressives and the Trump supporters both kind of railed against TPP. That was one of the first things Trump did when he became president, was he pulled us out of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And I think they may oppose them for different reasons, but there's definitely, and also the regressives hate NAFTA too for the most part, and so do the Trump supporters. So I don't know why. I really don't. I think it's something to do with protecting, various job sectors in the U.S. So yeah, that's another thing they have in common, is their opposition to free trade deals. Next one is committed to racial identity politics. Now, that comes up in the form of ethnic nationalism over here with the Trump supporters. And on the very far end of the Trump supporter kind of spectrum, you just have outright Nazi apologists and just outright white supremacists, which is not, I don't think, endemic to the Trump supporters, but it is basically all of those people are not supporting Hillary Clinton in that election, put it that way. And then, yeah, over here with the regressives, it comes up in the form of white guilt, save the minorities, Islamophilia, which is kind of the continual defense of Muslims and the refusal to criticize them and say anything bad about them. So yeah, that is an interesting part of both of these groups, is they are really into racialized identity politics. Over here, it's like we want to preserve the kind of white American, traditional, like white American state, and over here it's like fuck white people. White people are imperialistic assholes, and they have aggrieved the minorities enough. Haven't the minorities had enough from white people? So the next one is non-interventionism, which I put an asterisk by because I actually don't know how many of the Trump supporters are non-interventionist, because Trump spoke from both sides of his mouth during the election, basically saying, we're going to get out of the Middle East. The Middle East is a disaster, while also saying that we're going to bomb the hell out of ISIS. So really not sure about that one over there, but definitely the regressives are non-interventionist. Even for humanitarian reasons, I do think that's true, because basically the whole idea of a no-fly zone in Syria was a humanitarian effort, and the regressives opposed that, of course. So moving on, conspiratorial. Now that's a little vague, I suppose, but I think it's definitely true. The more you go on websites like Breitbart, or trying to think of an equivalent to Breitbart on the left, I really don't think there is one. Breitbart's pretty bad, but definitely kind of the Green Party, like Jill Stein. Okay, perfect example is Jill Stein's former running mate, Ajuma Baraka, I think is how you say his name. I don't know. I'm pretty sure that's it. Ajuma Baraka, yeah. Just look up some of the stuff he's said about the United States government, and you will see, a lot of those ideas, they are fringe in the mainstream, but they are not fringe when it comes to the regressives. Yeah, and the Trump supporters, I mean, think about just like Pizzagate, for example, the whole Pizzagate conspiracy. I mean, it's just insane. But it's conspiracies which are serving their partisan leanings. So they only endorse conspiracies that would kind of justify their cause and the things they're trying to do. So the next one is views the relationship between federal and state power opportunistically, i.e., when we're in power, fuck states' rights. Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, Trump supporters are not. Excuse me. Trump supporters are not politically conservative in that way. You know, traditionally, conservatism in the U.S. has been a commitment to states' rights. But of course, Trump supporters, it's the same with the regressives. It's when we're in power, we will use the federal government to override state power at every turn. And when you're in power, we will sit around and bitch and moan about states' rights, which is what's happening with the regressives now, as Trump is threatening to crack down on sanctuary cities, which are, traditionally that is just completely within the purview of state law, is whether or not you're going to have sanctuary cities. But yeah, so just basically opportunistic view of that relationship between the federal government and the state. And also another thing with the Trump people, and I don't think this is true of many of them, but Jeff Sessions is a quote unquote conservative Republican, and he's going to be he's going to be the attorney general, and he's threatened to crack down on medical marijuana in the states that have legalized marijuana. And yeah, not just medical, I think just legal marijuana. I think I don't know if he'll actually do that, but once again, that's just flagrant violation of states' rights if you are supposedly a conservative, which these people are supposedly conservative. But so yeah. Next one is suspicion of atheists. Now, that might be the most controversial one on here, but if you listen to people like Glenn Greenwald or Noam Chomsky, maybe, this is kind of a little pet one for me because I listen to Sam Harris fairly often, and just the amount of bullshit he has gotten for being an atheist, basically just because it's like, oh, if you're an atheist, then you oppose, in caveat, the regressives are totally fine with bashing on Christianity, but the moment you start bashing on Islam, now you're a bigot, and now we're going to try to shut you down and shut you up and tar and feather you with accusations that are just wildly inaccurate. But it doesn't matter. I think that is true of the Trump supporters as well, just because they tend to be more religious, and I think they view atheists as kind of undermining the moral fabric of the country. So the next one is, they both think that anyone who doesn't support their cause is either a corrupt asshole or they're retarded. And I think you definitely see that up here with the fact that they hate their party's establishment. Their entire party establishment is corrupt sellouts, corporate, just corporate drones. And if you don't personally support their cause, it's probably because you're either bought and paid for or you're a fucking idiot. So that definitely comes up on both sides. Excuse me. Yeah, so the next one is they both downplay the threat of Russia, and they both downplay the role that Russia clearly had in the 2016 election, and the possible connection between Trump and the Russian government. Not saying it exists, just saying there's a whole lot of smoke, may well be fire. Any rational person would acknowledge that it's a distinct possibility that his campaign had excessive contacts and connections with the Russian government during the campaign. But neither of these two groups do that. They refuse to acknowledge that, and they do it for different reasons. The regressives do it because they don't want to absolve Hillary Clinton of being a corrupt, incompetent candidate. And they basically want to say it was all Hillary Clinton's fault that she lost the election, had nothing to do with any outside forces. WikiLeaks is for sure not a front for the Russian government. Yeah, we know that I mean, there are literally regressives who will not even acknowledge that Russia hacked the DNC. They would just refuse to acknowledge that. So that's just amazing to me. But once again, it fits their agenda, right? So they this is like a reverse conspiracy. Like there's actually a conspiracy happening here, and they're like, oh no, the conspiracy is the Democrats are making it up to absolve themselves of guilt. So there we go, fits the agenda. So works for them. And then the Trump supporters, they don't want, it's the same thing. They have their own little narrative that they don't want to get messed up. And so, if Russia did play some significant role in the outcome of the election, then that makes it so Trump isn't as awesome. And he didn't just do it, he didn't just win just purely because he's the shit. There was like someone actually, some outside groups helping him behind the scenes. So obviously they're never going to admit that. Um, and weirdly, they downplay the threat that Russia has any sort of interest in the Baltic states or in undermining NATO. And I mean, these are things Trump literally during the campaign would talk about how, NATO was obsolete. He's literally said, I think while he was president, that he said NATO is obsolete. And that is just, NATO is the biggest enemy of Russian ambition in the world. I mean, anyone who has any kind of political education knows that that is true. So, yeah, that's another reason that they kind of, and I don't even know why they do that. I don't know why they would why they would absolve Russia of any kind of ambition to, you know, take back some of those former Soviet bloc countries. I think they literally are just like, well, Trump wants to be friends with Russia, so we will defend Russia at every turn. It's just amazing. So once again, both of them have their own little narratives and their own little agendas, um, and they happen to overlap here. Downplay the threat of Russia, and then feel aggrieved and victimized. I think just the language these people use, like the Bernie Sanders people are like, oh my God, like the DNC colluded with Hillary Clinton to like to to make it so Bernie Sanders wouldn't win. There's literally people who think that like Bernie Sanders would have absolutely beaten Hillary Clinton, but the DNC just like intervened, and they're like once again conspiratorial. Like, what are they based that on? They base that on like a couple of leaked emails from low-level staffers at the DNC. And what were they doing? Were they like talking about some master plan to like derail Bernie Sanders? Like, not really, not at all. Actually, not at all. They were just talking about how they personally favored Hillary Clinton. So, I mean, yeah, and obviously, once again, Bernie Sanders wasn't even a Democrat. He was an independent. So obviously, the party is the national committee is going to favor the candidate that is a part of their party. No shit. But they didn't do anything underhanded. I mean, the most you could say is, oh, Hillary got like 2 questions handed to her before a debate. Wow. Yeah, really stole the election from Bernie Sanders on that one. And then the same thing with the Trump supporters. I mean, they feel like their country's being like trying to, their country's being taken away from them by minorities and, God knows who else. But just yeah, and their jobs are being shipped away by, greedy corporations, which is, there's some truth to that. But just the feeling of kind of being oppressed and victimized, and like you have a grievance, like the world has conspired against your interests. Both of these groups, there's a strong streak of that in both of these groups. And then the last one that I could think of was they hate the mainstream media. And if you ever watch like the Young Turks, for example, they're a perfect example of this. I mean, they literally shit on CNN. They'll pretty much shit on anyone that's not them. And once again, that fits their agenda. That fits the Young Turks' agenda because they're like, oh yeah, we're new media. Like, we're trustworthy. We're more direct. We're right to the people, bro. We're on YouTube. And it's like, yeah, you have no fact checking over there. You people are barely professional journalists. I mean, how many people there have a journalism degree? I would really love to know that. Like, and they get things wrong on a regular basis. People call them out for it all the time. They never go back and correct anything, and they just are so clearly driven by an agenda over there, you know. But yeah, so they bash on the mainstream media because the mainstream media is like, oh yeah, the mainstream media was in line with Hillary Clinton the whole time, and like they shat on Bernie Sanders, and it's like, oh my god, fucking get over yourselves. Once again, conspiratorial. I really do think that both of these groups, like the Trump supporters, will say the liberal media, you know, and it goes back to that sense of grievance, like, oh man, the liberal media, conspiratorial, okay, right here, the liberal media is, shitting on my guy all the time. And the regressives felt the same way, except not the liberal media. They were like, oh man, the corporatist democratic media is shitting on Bernie Sanders all the time. So, yeah, there's a lot of similarities between these two groups. Obviously, there are a lot of differences. You could go through and look at some of those on your own time, because I really don't think there's much explaining to do. I think that's all pretty goddamn self-explanatory. So, yeah, these two groups of people are not as far apart as you think. They're both illiberal, I will say that. They both have kind of authoritarian tendencies, and they're both wrong on the vast majority of things. You know, just because they have these things in common doesn't mean that over here these are not like extreme positions. These are mostly, I mean, this, I think this. A lot of these are just kind of like, these are not like centrist positions at all. So, yeah, basically, the horseshoe theory stands true when it comes to these two groups.